Think about what you learned in school. All those maps on the walls, all those dates you memorized, all those neat timelines that made history feel organized and complete. What if some of the most important parts were left out entirely? Not because your teachers were lying to you, but because even they didn't know. Because somewhere along the way, certain facts got filed under inconvenient, and the curriculum moved on without them. If you are using this to fall asleep, perfect. These mysteries have been waiting for centuries. They can wait until morning. Subscribe and stick around. Tonight we're going to explore 20 pieces of geographic and historical evidence that challenge almost everything you thought you knew about human civilization. Not conspiracy theories, not speculation, just documented facts that somehow never made it into your textbook. Let's start with something that should be impossible. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis created a map. That map showed the coastline of Antarctica. The problem is Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, 300 years later. And here is what makes it stranger. The Piri Reis map doesn't just show Antarctica, it shows the coastline beneath the ice. The actual landmass that modern sonar only confirmed in the 20th century. Piri Reis himself noted that he compiled his map from older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. Scientists have verified the accuracy. The coastline matches our modern surveys of the subglacial terrain with remarkable precision. The ice sheet covering Antarctica has been there for at least 6,000 years, probably much longer. So who mapped it before the ice? The standard explanation is coincidence or creative interpretation. But here is the thing. The Piri Reis map isn't alone. There are dozens of medieval and ancient maps showing geographic features that weren't supposed to be known yet. Coastlines that hadn't been explored, islands that hadn't been discovered. Charles Hapgood, a history professor at Keene State College, spent years analyzing these anomalous maps in the 1950s and 60s. He found consistent evidence suggesting they were copied from much older sources that used sophisticated spherical trigonometry to project the curved Earth onto flat surfaces. Albert Einstein wrote a foreword to Hapgood's book on the subject. Einstein found the evidence compelling enough to lend his name to the project. He acknowledged that the maps seemed to preserve geographic knowledge from a civilization far older than any in the accepted historical record. The Orontius Phineas map from 1531 shows Antarctica as an ice-free continent with rivers and mountains. The Haji Ahmed map from 1559 shows a land bridge connecting Alaska to Siberia. That land bridge existed during the last ice age. It has been underwater for over 10,000 years. These cartographers claimed they were copying from much older sources, maps that have since been lost. The implication is uncomfortable. Someone was accurately charting the Earth long before our accepted timeline of civilization allows for it. But here is the second fact they never taught you. The Sahara Desert was once green. Not in some impossibly distant epoch, just 6,000 years ago, during what scientists call the African humid period. The Sahara was covered in grasslands, lakes, and forests. This wasn't a small change. We're talking about an area the size of the continental United States transforming from fertile paradise to barren desert in just a few hundred years. Cave paintings in the Sahara show people swimming, fishing, herding cattle, hippopotamuses, crocodiles. Archaeological surveys have found the remains of fishing villages in what is now the most inhospitable desert on Earth. Stone tools, pottery, evidence of agriculture. These weren't nomads passing through, they were settled communities, and they vanished when the rains stopped. The climate shift happened so quickly that it may have triggered the rise of Egyptian civilization. As the Sahara dried up, people migrated toward the Nile. Population density increased. Social complexity followed. The desert that seems eternal is actually younger than the pyramids. The Nabta Playa site in southern Egypt tells the story of this transition. Around 7,000 years ago, it was a thriving settlement beside a seasonal lake. The people there built what may be the oldest astronomical alignment in the world: stone circles that track the summer solstice. These weren't primitive hunter-gatherers, they had domesticated cattle. They built planned structures. They understood the movements of the stars well enough to encode them in stone. And then the rains stopped, and they disappeared from the archaeological record. And that brings us to fact number 3. The Great Sphinx of Giza might be thousands of years older than we think. Geologist Robert Schoch examined the erosion patterns on the Sphinx enclosure in 1990 and found something troubling. The vertical weathering patterns on the walls surrounding the Sphinx are consistent with water erosion, not wind and sand, which create horizontal patterns, but sustained rainfall. Heavy rainfall, the kind of rainfall that hasn't fallen in Egypt for at least 7,000 years. If Schoch is right, the core body of the Sphinx was carved during or before the last wet period in Egypt. That would make it at least twice as old as the conventional date, possibly much older. The head, which shows less erosion, may have been recarved later by the pharaohs. Egyptologists largely reject this theory. They point to the style of the headdress, the historical records, the logic of the Giza complex. But no one has fully explained the erosion patterns. The geology doesn't match the archaeology. Something doesn't add up. Here is fact number 4. There were humans in the Americas tens of thousands of years before the Clovis people. For decades, the Clovis first theory dominated archaeology. It claimed the first Americans arrived about 13,000 years ago via the Bering Land Bridge. Any evidence suggesting earlier arrival was dismissed or ignored. Careers were destroyed over this. Archaeologists who found pre-Clovis sites were accused of contamination, poor methodology, wishful thinking. The scientific establishment was absolutely certain. They were wrong. Sites like Monteverde in Chile have been definitively dated to at least 14,500 years ago. The Topper site in South Carolina shows evidence of human activity going back 50,000 years. Footprints in New Mexico have been dated to 23,000 years ago. The first Americans didn't just walk across from Siberia. Some may have come by boat, following the Pacific coastline. Others might have arrived from Europe, following the edge of the ice sheet across the Atlantic. The true story of human arrival in the Americas is far more complex than any textbook admits. The Solutrean hypothesis, though controversial, proposes that some early Americans descended from European populations who crossed the Atlantic ice sheet during the last glacial maximum. Stone tool technologies in eastern North America show similarities to tools from Ice Age France and Spain. Genetic studies have complicated the picture even further. Some Native American populations carry traces of Australasian ancestry that shouldn't be there according to the simple Bering Strait model. The implications are staggering. Multiple waves of migration from multiple directions over tens of thousands of years. The Americas weren't empty when the first waves of migrants arrived. They found a continent shaped by previous human activity, fire management, animal population changes, landscape modifications. The story of who was here first keeps getting pushed further and further back. And speaking of things that arrived earlier than expected, fact number 5. There is mounting evidence of transatlantic contact thousands of years before Columbus. Not just Vikings, though they definitely reached North America around 1000 AD, but contact going back much further. Traces of coca and tobacco have been found in Egyptian mummies. Both plants are native only to the Americas. Traces of cocaine appeared in mummies from 3,000 years ago. The standard explanation is contamination, but the findings have been replicated across multiple studies and laboratories. Ancient Roman and Phoenician artifacts have turned up at archaeological sites throughout Brazil. Inscriptions that appear to be Old World writing systems have been found carved into rocks in Oklahoma, West Virginia, and elsewhere. Most are dismissed as hoaxes or misidentification, but here is the thing. Thor Heyerdahl proved in 1947 that ancient boats could cross the Atlantic. His balsa raft Kon-Tiki sailed from South America to Polynesia. Later expeditions showed that ancient vessels could survive ocean crossings in both directions. Heyerdahl later built Ra and Ra II, reed boats based on ancient Egyptian designs. He sailed them from Morocco to the Caribbean. The voyages weren't easy, but they were possible. The technology to cross oceans existed thousands of years before Columbus. The question isn't whether ancient people could have crossed the oceans, they clearly could. The question is why we're so resistant to the idea that they did. Why does the archaeological establishment treat transoceanic contact as fringe theory rather than reasonable hypothesis? Part of it is nationalism. The story of Columbus discovering America supports certain historical narratives. Part of it is academic caution. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But the evidence keeps accumulating, and the claims become less extraordinary with each new discovery. Fact number 6 might explain part of that resistance. The Library of Alexandria wasn't destroyed in a single dramatic fire. That is the story we all learned. Julius Caesar's troops accidentally burned it down, or Christian mobs destroyed it, or Arab conquerors, a singular catastrophic loss of ancient knowledge. Except that is not what happened. The library declined gradually over several centuries. It was damaged multiple times, yes, but each time it was partially rebuilt, restocked, repurposed. The real destruction was administrative, funding cuts, political neglect. Brain drain as scholars left for other cities. By the time of the Arab conquest in 641 AD, there was essentially nothing left to destroy. The library had already faded into irrelevance. The dramatic fire story is more compelling. It gives us someone to blame. But the truth is more troubling. Ancient knowledge wasn't lost in a moment of violence. It was lost through centuries of indifference. And that is still happening today. Archives underfunded. Languages dying, indigenous knowledge systems ignored, until it is too late to record them. Fact number 7. There is a massive ancient structure submerged off the coast of Japan. In 1986, a diver near Yonaguni Island discovered what appeared to be a stepped pyramid underwater. The structure is roughly 200 feet wide and 90 feet tall. Geologists argue about whether it is natural or man-made. The straight edges and right angles look artificial. But similar formations occur naturally in the region's sandstone. What is not debated is the timeline. If humans built this structure, they did it during the last ice age. Sea levels were 300 feet lower. Then Yonaguni would have been dry land connected to Taiwan and mainland Asia. That was more than 10,000 years ago, before agriculture, before pottery, before permanent settlements anywhere in the region, according to standard archaeology. Masazaki Kimura, a marine geologist at the University of the Ryukyus, has studied the formation for decades. He has identified what he believes are roads, walls, a stadium-like structure, and drainage channels. His critics say nature carved these features through erosion and tectonic activity. Both explanations have problems. Natural formations don't usually have right angles meeting at multiple points. But human construction at this date seems impossible. The debate continues, and the structure remains there, waiting for better technology or more open minds. The Yonaguni monument remains controversial. But it is not alone. Similar submerged structures have been reported off Cuba, India, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean. Rising seas at the end of the Ice Age flooded millions of square miles of coastal lowlands. Whatever was there is now underwater, and most of it has never been systematically explored. Fact number 8. The Black Sea flood may have inspired the story of Noah's Ark. Around 7,500 years ago, the Black Sea was a freshwater lake, much smaller than it is today. Then the ice sheets melted, sea levels rose, and the Mediterranean broke through the narrow strait where Istanbul now stands. Water poured into the Black Sea basin at 200 times the volume of Niagara Falls. The lake rose by 6 inches per Dalton Y for months. Coastal settlements that had stood for generations were submerged. Tens of thousands of square miles of inhabited land disappeared underwater. The survivors fled in all directions, carrying stories of a great flood that had destroyed their world. Archaeologist Robert Ballard, who discovered the Titanic, found evidence of ancient settlements on the floor of the Black Sea in 2,000 buildings. Artifacts, signs of human habitation preserved in the oxygen, free waters. The flood wasn't myth, it was memory. The Black Sea's anoxic depths preserve organic material that would decay anywhere else. Ballard found ancient shorelines, riverbeds, and what appeared to be structures made of wood and stone. The preservation is remarkable. The implications are profound. William Ryan and Walter Pittman, the geologists who proposed the flood hypothesis, calculated that the water level rose fast enough to force populations to flee. Not in days, but over years and decades, fast enough to be traumatic, slow enough to allow escape. Similar flood stories appear in cultures around the world. Sumerian, Hindu, Chinese, Native American, Polynesian? The standard interpretation is that floods are universal experiences. Rivers overflow, tsunamis strike. Of course, every culture has flood myths, but here is the thing. What if some of those stories preserve real memories of the catastrophic sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age? What if the flood myths aren't just about local disasters, but about the loss of an entire coastal world? Fact number 9. Göbekli Tepe changes everything we thought we knew about the origins of civilization. This site in southeastern Turkey was built around 11,500 years ago. That is more than 6,000 years before Stonehenge, more than 7,000 years before the pyramids. The site consists of massive T-shaped stone pillars arranged in circles, some weighing over 10 tons. They're decorated with intricate carvings of animals: lions, bulls, foxes, vultures. The craftsmanship is sophisticated. The organization required to build it was immense. And here is what makes it impossible, according to everything we thought we knew. Göbekli Tepe was built by hunter-gatherers before agriculture, before permanent villages, before writing. The textbooks say hunter-gatherers lived in small nomadic bands, too busy surviving to build monuments. Göbekli Tepe proves that wrong. These people were organized enough to quarry, transport, and erect massive stones, skilled enough to carve detailed artwork, motivated enough to spend generations on a project that served no obvious survival purpose. Something was driving them. Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist, who excavated the site for over 20 years, believed it was a temple, a gathering place for religious rituals that brought hunter-gatherer bands together from across the region. The construction of the temple may have actually motivated the development of agriculture nearby. Think about what that means. We were taught that agriculture came first, then surplus food allowed people to build monuments. Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite. The desire to build something sacred came first. Then people needed reliable food supplies to support the construction project. The earliest domesticated wheat appears near Göbekli Tepe. Right around the time of its construction, religion might have invented agriculture. Belief might have created civilization. The implications overturn a century of assumptions about human social development. Even stranger, the site appears to have been deliberately buried around 8000 BC, intentionally covered with rubble and abandoned, as if the builders wanted to preserve it or hide it. The question that keeps archaeologists up at night is simple. What else don't we know about? Fact number 10. There is a lost continent in the Pacific, and it is not Atlantis. Zealandia is a mostly submerged landmass about half the size of Australia. New Zealand and New Caledonia are its visible peaks. The rest lies beneath the ocean. In 2017, geologists officially recognized Zealandia as a continent. It has all the characteristics: continental crust, volcanic activity, a distinct boundary. It just happens to be 94% underwater. About 60 million years ago, it was dry land. There is no evidence humans ever lived on Zealandia. It sank long before our species existed. But its existence proves something important. The map of Earth hasn't always looked the way it does. Now landmasses rise and fall on geological timescales, and human timescales might be longer than we think. Fact number 11. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests a comet or asteroid struck Earth about 12,800 years ago, potentially wiping out an advanced civilization. In 2007, researchers found a distinct layer of nanodiamonds, iridium, and spherules at dozens of sites across North America, Europe, and the Middle East, all dating to the same moment, the signature of an extraterrestrial impact or airburst. This event coincides with the sudden return to Ice Age conditions called the Younger Dryas. For over 1,000 years, temperatures plummeted. Megafauna like mammoths and saber-toothed cats went extinct. The Clovis culture in North America vanished almost overnight. The hypothesis remains controversial. Some scientists dispute the impact evidence. Others point out that the Younger Dryas might have natural explanations, but the timing is remarkable, right at the moment when human civilization seems to restart, right when Göbekli Tepe was being built. What if there were advanced societies before the Younger Dryas? What if the impact wiped them out, and Göbekli Tepe represents the survivors trying to preserve what they knew? It is speculation, but the impact evidence is real. The sudden civilizational leap is real. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis has gained support from an unexpected source. Researchers examining ice cores from Greenland found a platinum spike at exactly the same layer as the proposed impact. Platinum is rare on Earth, but common in asteroids and comets. The geographic distribution of the impact markers suggests multiple airbursts, not a single crater. Something broke apart in the atmosphere and exploded over a wide area. The Tunguska event of 1908, which flattened 800 square miles of Siberian forest, left no crater either. If a Tunguska scale event happened over the ice sheets 12,800 years ago, it could have destabilized them catastrophically. Massive meltwater floods, rapid sea level rise, climate disruption, and for any civilization dependent on coastal resources, total destruction. Fact number 12. Ancient engineers accomplished feats we still can't fully explain. The precision of the Great Pyramid is accurate to within 1/100th of a degree. Its base is level to within less than an inch across 13 acres. The stones of Sacsayhuaman in Peru fit together so precisely that you can't slide a piece of paper between them. Some weigh over 100 tons. They have complex, irregular shapes that lock together like three-dimensional puzzles. No mortar was used. The Antikythera mechanism from ancient Greece is an astronomical computer of stunning complexity. It predicted eclipses, tracked planetary movements, and calculated the timing of the Olympic Games. Nothing approaching its sophistication appeared, again for over 1,000 years. The standard response is that we underestimate ancient ingenuity. Given enough time and motivation, people can achieve remarkable things with simple tools. And that is true. But it doesn't explain the gaps. Where is the progression from simple to complex? Where are the practice pieces? The failed experiments? The intermediate technologies? Sometimes the most sophisticated examples appear earliest, and later versions are cruder, as if knowledge was being lost over time rather than gained. The Great Pyramid's original casing stones were polished to a mirror finish. When intact, the pyramid would have reflected sunlight like a beacon visible for miles. The precision of the fit left no gap for a blade to enter. We can do this today with modern tools. Could we do it with copper and stone? At Baalbek in Lebanon, the largest work stone in the ancient world weighs over 1,600 tons. It was quarried, shaped, and moved partway to a construction site before being abandoned. The Romans built their temple on top of an even older foundation that used these impossible stones. The standard explanation is slave labor and time. Enough workers over enough years can accomplish anything. But that doesn't explain the precision. That doesn't explain stones fitted to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. That level of accuracy requires measurement tools we don't find in the archaeological record. Fact number 13. The ancient Egyptians may have used sound to move massive stones. This sounds like pseudoscience. But there are intriguing hints. Ancient texts describe priests chanting as stones were transported. Acoustic levitation, while limited, is real physics. In 2014, researchers demonstrated that acoustic levitation could move small objects using sound waves. The principle works. The energy requirements for large stones would be enormous, but we don't know what technologies the ancients might have developed and lost. Multiple ancient cultures describe builders who could move stones with sound or song. The walls of Jericho fell to trumpets. Greek myths describe Amphion building Thebes by playing his lyre. Incan legends say the stones of their temples were moved by crystal bells, probably metaphor, probably legend, but when the same impossible claim appears independently across cultures that never contacted each other, it makes you wonder, what if they're describing something real that we've forgotten how to understand? Fact number 14. The Amazon rainforest may be a human-made landscape. We think of the Amazon as pristine wilderness, untouched until Europeans arrived. Archaeological evidence increasingly suggests otherwise. Surveys have identified geometric earthworks called geoglyphs across hundreds of square miles. These structures, some older than the pyramids, were built by large organized societies. Terra preta, or Amazonian dark earth, is found throughout the region. It is human-made soil. The Brazil nut tree, the rubber tree, the cacao tree, all the most economically valuable species in the Amazon, are suspiciously clustered near archaeological sites. The forest was planted, deliberately cultivated over thousands of years to provide food, medicine, and materials. When Europeans arrived with diseases that killed up to 90% of the indigenous population, the garden reverted to jungle. What we call untouched wilderness is actually abandoned farmland. The Amazon isn't pristine nature. It is the overgrown ruins of a lost civilization. LiDAR surveys have transformed our understanding of Amazonian archaeology. By penetrating the forest canopy with laser pulses, researchers can map what lies beneath, and what lies beneath is staggering. Geometric earthworks, raised agricultural fields, road networks connecting settlements. In 2020, a survey of the Bolivian Amazon revealed an entire network of previously unknown urban centers. Population estimates run into the hundreds of thousands. These weren't scattered villages, They were planned cities with sophisticated water management, defensive structures, and suburban sprawl. The people who built these cities had technologies we're still trying to understand. Terra Preta, the dark earth they created, remains fertile for centuries. Modern agronomists study it hoping to replicate its properties. We've lost the recipe for soil that feeds itself, and the people who built it had sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Fact number 5. Ancient cultures around the world encoded astronomical information in their myths, architecture, and calendars with remarkable precision. The Great Pyramid's descending passage aligns with the North Star as it appeared around 2600 BC. But here is what is strange. Due to precession, the Earth's axial wobble, the North Star changes over a 26,000-year cycle. Ancient myths from cultures across the world describe this precession cycle. The ages of Pisces, Aquarius, and so on, each lasting about 2,000 years, the Hindu Yugas, the Mesoamerican world ages, different names for the same astronomical phenomenon. How did Stone Age cultures observe and record a cycle that takes 26,000 years to complete? You can't see precession in a human lifetime. You can barely measure it in a civilization's lifetime. Yet the knowledge was encoded in myths and monuments around the world. Either ancient cultures were far more sophisticated in their astronomical observations than we credit them, or they inherited knowledge from an even older source, a source that watched the skies for thousands of years and recorded what they saw. Stonehenge tracks the midsummer sunrise and midwinter sunset with remarkable precision. But that is just the obvious alignment. Researchers have identified dozens of additional astronomical orientations built into the monument: lunar standstills, eclipse cycles, stellar alignments, the Antikythera mechanism, that remarkable Greek computer, was built around 100 BC. But its astronomical model corresponds to a date 400 years earlier. It may have been copied from an even older source, preserving knowledge that was ancient when the Greeks inherited it. The pattern is consistent. Sophisticated astronomical knowledge, appearing fully formed, as if learned rather than discovered. Methods of observation that would require centuries of patient watching, mathematical relationships that suggest measurement tools we haven't found. Fact number 16. There is evidence of nuclear war in ancient India. No, not actual nuclear weapons, but the Mohenjo-Daro site in Pakistan shows some puzzling characteristics. Skeletons scattered in the streets as if death came suddenly, vitrified bricks, stones fused together by extreme heat, the same kind of vitrification you see at nuclear test sites. The Mahabharata, ancient Indian epic, describes weapons that sound remarkably like nuclear bombs: blinding light, mushroom clouds, radiation sickness. The mainstream explanation is volcanic activity or lightning strikes, or exaggerated mythology based on conventional warfare, and that is probably correct. Ancient civilizations almost certainly didn't have nuclear weapons. The physics alone makes it impossible, but the vitrification is real. The sudden abandonment is real. The literary descriptions are remarkably specific for pure imagination. Something happened at these sites that we don't fully understand, and we might be too quick to dismiss ancient accounts as mere fantasy. Fact number 17. The Phoenicians circumnavigated Africa around 600 BC. This is actually documented by Herodotus, but for centuries, historians dismissed it as impossible. Ancient ships couldn't make such a voyage. Ancient navigators didn't have the skill. Then Herodotus mentioned a detail that seemed to prove the story was false. The Phoenician sailors reported that when they rounded the southern tip of Africa, the sun was on their right to the north. In the ancient Mediterranean, the sun was always to the south, but that detail proves the voyage was real. South of the equator, the sun does appear to the north. The Phoenician sailors described something they could only know from direct observation, a geographical fact that wouldn't be rediscovered for 2,000 years. Ancient sailors were far more capable than we assumed. They crossed oceans, rounded continents, reached lands that wouldn't be officially discovered for millennia. The history we learned in school is the history of European exploration. A much older history remains largely unwritten. Fact number 18. Sunderland was a massive landmass connecting Southeast Asia during the Ice Age. When sea levels were lower, the islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines were all connected by dry land. This wasn't just a land bridge. Sunderland was larger than India. It had rivers, mountains, forests, and according to genetic evidence, large human populations. When the Ice Age ended, rising seas flooded an area larger than the Mediterranean. The flooding happened in pulses, periods of rapid sea level rise, followed by stability. Each pulse would have devastated coastal communities, forcing migration, destroying accumulated knowledge. Some researchers think this is the origin of Southeast Asian flood myths, the survivors scattered to higher ground. Modern populations across Southeast Asia and the Pacific carry genetic signatures of this ancient displacement. Languages, agricultural techniques, cultural practices, all potentially traceable to a drowned homeland that most people have never heard of. The people who fled Sunderland didn't just survive, they thrived. They became some of the greatest seafarers in human history. Polynesian navigation across thousands of miles of open ocean. The settlement of Madagascar from Indonesia, not Africa. The mysterious similarities between distant cultures. Some researchers propose that agricultural knowledge spread outward from Sunderland, as refugees brought their seeds and techniques to new lands. Rice cultivation, taro farming, breadfruit cultivation, the staple crops of tropical Asia and the Pacific, all potentially traced back to a flooded paradise. We focus on the civilizations that survived. The Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Chinese, but those were the high ground cultures, the ones who stayed above water. What flourished on the lowlands, we may never know. Fact number 19. Ancient peoples recorded precise astronomical events that help us date their civilizations. And some of those dates don't match the official timeline. The Dresden Codex, a Mayan text, contains astronomical tables of remarkable accuracy. It tracks Venus cycles with an error of only 2 hours over 500 years. It predicts eclipses. It charts planetary movements that wouldn't be matched in Europe until Copernicus. And some of its reference dates point to events tens of thousands of years in the past. The standard interpretation is that these are mythological dates, origin stories projected into the distant past for religious purposes. But the Mayans were meticulous astronomers. Why would they mix precise observation with random mythology? Similar questions arise with Hindu astronomical texts. The Surya Siddhanta describes planetary movements with precision that seems impossible without telescopes. It mentions axial precession, planetary diameters, and orbital parameters that ancient observers supposedly couldn't have known. Again, the explanation is coincidence or calculation from later observations attributed to earlier texts. Maybe, but the pattern keeps appearing. Ancient cultures claiming precise astronomical knowledge they supposedly couldn't possess. And finally, fact number 20. History is written by the victors, but geography belongs to everyone. The facts we've explored tonight aren't secrets. They're published in peer-reviewed journals, discussed at academic conferences, available to anyone who looks. But they don't make it into textbooks. They don't get taught in schools, because they complicate the neat narrative we've constructed about human progress. The story that goes from caves to farms to cities to us, with no detours or surprises. The real story is messier. Civilizations rose and fell. Knowledge was gained and lost. The map kept changing under people's feet, and through it all, humans kept trying to understand their place in the world and preserve what they learned. What survives is fragments, cave paintings, carved stones, myths that might be memories, maps that might be copies of copies of copies, each generation receiving a diminished inheritance and doing their best to add to it before passing it on. The 20 facts we explored tonight don't prove any single alternative theory. They don't validate Atlantis or ancient aliens or any specific claim about lost civilizations. What they demonstrate is simpler and more profound. We don't know what we don't know. The gaps in our understanding are larger than we admit. And every time we think we have the past figured out, some new discovery reminds us how much remains hidden. The Piri Reis map, the Green Sahara, the water erosion on the Sphinx, pre-Clovis Americans, transatlantic contact, the gradual death of Alexandria, Yonaguni, the Black Sea flood, Göbekli Tepe, Zealandia, the Younger Dryas impact, ancient precision engineering, acoustic mysteries, the Amazon garden, processional knowledge, vitrified cities, Phoenician circumnavigation, Sunderland, ancient astronomy, and the selective nature of what we remember. 20 facts, 20 invitations to look deeper, 20 reminders that the story of human civilization is still being written, still being revised, still surprising us with what we find when we look in unexpected places. If you are still awake, think about this. You are living through a moment when these hidden histories are finally coming to light. New technologies like LiDAR are revealing cities under jungle canopies. Genetic analysis is rewriting migration histories. Underwater archaeology is just beginning. The next generation's textbooks will look different from yours. Some of what they learn will come from discoveries made in your lifetime, and some of it will be facts that were always there, waiting for someone to pay attention. Right now, somewhere in the world, a researcher is analyzing data that will overturn another assumption. A diver is exploring a submerged structure that will rewrite a timeline. A geneticist is finding a connection that will link populations we thought were separate. The forbidden facts of today become the accepted knowledge of tomorrow. That is how science works, slowly, stubbornly. But eventually, truth has a way of surfacing. And if you are drifting off now, that is perfect. These mysteries have kept for thousands of years. They'll keep for a few more hours while you sleep. When you wake up, they'll still be there, still waiting, still inviting you to look closer. Thank you for spending this time exploring the forbidden corners of geographic history, the parts they left out, the evidence they overlooked, the questions they didn't want to answer. Subscribe if you haven't already. There is always more to discover. Good night. Sleep well. And remember, the map is not the territory. It never was, and it never will be.